Hello, ma'am. Good afternoon. And also to our viewers this afternoon. Hello.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon to our dear elementary teachers. So once again, let us acknowledge our participants from Bartolome Integrated School and Valencia Integrated School.
What else, sir?
We have also from Valderas Integrated School and New Carmen and Integrated School.
Yes. So,
Good afternoon also to our Public Schools District Supervisor of Cluster 6, Sir Jonito Ogalan, our cluster head, and also our uh, school heads in the different schools of our cluster and our teachers for the integrated
yes.
schools. Good afternoon to ating lahat.
So, good afternoon for Bartolome Integrated School. We have Sir Henry Valladares. For New Valencia Integrated School, we have Sir Antonio Tutor. Yours truly for Valderas Integrated School. So, once again, good afternoon, everyone. So, what's in store for us this afternoon, Sir Jermaine?
Yes, we really live here to this breakout session for the elementary integrated school teachers. And we are down to our last five MELCs presenters. And kaninang umaga nakapresenta po ang mga ESP, Aralpan, MAPE, at saka Kinder presenters. Ngayong hapon naman ay makikinig tayo sa mga presenters ng mga MELCs like Mother Tongue, English, Filipino, Math, at Science.
So, at this moment, we'll be hearing the most essential learning competencies for the mother tongue subject learning unit. Let's welcome Mr. Henry P. Valladares, Principal 1 of Bartolome Integrated School.
Superintendent Dr. Rinaldo M. Giliena, sa atong Assistant Schools Division Superintendent Dr. Basilio Manay Jr. o Ma'am Emma Campo Redondo, sa atong Cluster 6 Public Schools District Supervisor Dr. Janito Ogalan, Cluster 6 school heads, teachers, participants, may adlaw ka natong tanan. Karong hapuna atong pagatukion ang most essential learning competencies sa mother tongue. Ang mother tongue sa Davao City mao ang Cebuano Bisaya, except for those areas with IP communities. What are MELCs in mother tongue? The endurance criterion was used in the process of identifying the MELCs. Which learning competencies were considered enduring if the learning competency is useful in lifelong learning? Those that work in close association with other competencies in other subjects. Example, interprets a pictograph based on a given legend. This can also be used in teaching mathematics. We have here the number of learning competencies. Please observe that in grade 1, in our K-12 standard curriculum guide, we have 768 learning competencies. While in mother tongue MELCs, we have only 71. In grade 2, we have 602 learning competencies in our curriculum guide, while in our MELCs, we have only 38. For our grade 3, we have 368 competencies in our curriculum guide. In our MELCs, we have only 26. For a total of 1,738 learning competencies in our K-12 curriculum guide. Now we have only 138 learning competencies in our most essential learning competencies in mother tongue. MELCs are considerably less than the original number of learning competencies in the curriculum because of two factors. First, recurrence is limited. Example, in grade 1, mother tongue oral language, participate actively during story reading by making comments and asking questions. Participate actively during story reading by making comments and asking questions using complete sentences. That is from grade 2 learning competencies. It appears again in grade 2 learning competencies. Another example in learning competencies which recur in a quarter, mother tongue grade 1 oral language. Since quarter 1 in grade 1 we focus on oral language. Listen and respond to others in oral conversation. Participate actively during story reading by making comments and asking questions. Same as with the list of these mother tongue competencies, it appears that it recur in the same list of competencies. Listen and respond to others in oral conversation, and participate actively during story reading by making comments and asking questions. Kasabayan sila with the same thought and competencies. MELCs are also considerably less than the original number of learning competencies in the curriculum because of two factors. First is recurrence is limited and learning competencies are merged or clustered. For example, in this quarter, in grammar awareness, vocabulary and concept development, and attitude towards reading. Learning competencies merged or clustered. In our most essential learning competencies, we have here in the first quarter, grade 1, talk about oneself and one's personal experiences using appropriate expressions, family, pet, favorite food, personal experiences, friends, favorite toys, etc. The three competencies were being merged into one competency in the most essential learning competencies. How did we come up with meals in mother tongue? In the meals were mother tongue, in the meals were retained, rephrased, merged or clustered, and others were dropped. We have here grade level standards in grade 1. The learning demonstrates basic communication skills in talking about familiar topics using simple words in both verbal and nonverbal cues to understand spoken language, shows understanding of basic vocabulary and language structures, reading process, writing system, and appreciates aspects of one's culture. Meaning in grade 1, it is still very basic. And in grade 1, we start with oral language or oracy. We have also here grade level standards in grade 2. The learner demonstrates communication skills in talking about a variety of topics using developing vocabulary and simple phrases and sentences. Simple to complex spoken language using both verbal and non-verbal cues, understands vocabulary and language structures, appreciates and understands the cultural aspects of the language, and the writing system used, and reads and writes simple and short literary and informational texts. And grade 2, it is all about the variety of topics. We have also here grade level standards for grade 3, mother tongue. The learner demonstrates communication skills in talking about a variety of topics using expanding vocabulary and phrases, shows understanding of spoken language in different contexts using both verbal and nonverbal cues, vocabulary and language structures, cultural aspects of the language, reads and writes literary and informational texts, meaning expanding vocabulary and phrases in different contexts. Learners in grade 3 are already a good reader in mother tongue. Learning competencies from K to 12 curriculum. In mother tongue, grade 1, oral language, talk about oneself and one's personal experiences, family, pet, favorite food. Mother tongue grade 1, grammar awareness, use appropriate expressions orally to introduce oneself, family, friends, others. Mother tongue grade 1, vocabulary and concept development, use vocabulary referring to people, self, family, friends, animals, objects, musical instruments, environment. They were merged or clustered. Although the three learning competencies are classified under three different domains, they can be clustered since they may also require the same skills. In the most essential learning competencies, it talks about oneself and personal experiences using appropriate expressions, family, pet, favorite food, friends, favorite toys, etc. So these three competencies were being merged or clustered. Why? Although the three learning competencies are classified under three different domains, they can be clustered since they may all require the same skills. And in the melts observed in the first quarter in grade 1, this is our competency where clustered, which where we clustered from the three competencies, the oral language, grammar awareness, vocabulary, and concept development. Learning competencies from K to 12 curriculum guide. From grade 2 mother tongue oral language, participate actively during reading. Start reading by making comments and asking questions using complete sentences. Mother tongue, grade 2, read a large number of regularly spelled multisyllabic words. Identify the gender of naming words where applicable. They were retained. The three learning competencies were retained. Why? The following learning competencies are enduring and are foundational skills in later competencies. We have here the learning competencies in K to 12 curriculum guide. This is in grade 2 mother tongue, attitude towards reading. Express individual choices and taste for text. Show love for reading by listening attentively during start reading and by making comments, reactions. Browse, read books for various purposes such as for learning or for pleasure. The three learning competencies in the K to 12 curriculum guide were deleted. It is because all learning competencies under the attitude toward readings domain were deleted because they are already embedded in the teaching and learning process. Next, we have Mother Tongue Grade 3. In grammar, identifies and uses verbs appropriate for the grade level. Uses the correct form of the verb given the time signal. Uses the correct form of the verb that agrees with the subject. So these three learning competencies in the K-12 curriculum guide were merged or clustered. This is classified as some domain and skills requiring some cognitive demand. Therefore, it can be summed in the example milk. In the most essential learning competencies, it uses the correct form of the verb that agrees with the subject when writing an event or an interesting experience. Another, in grade 3, study skills, enumerates and interprets the labels in an illustration. This competency, okay, when rephrased, they have to remove some words with two verbs to be concise. Grade level standards are maintained through the chosen MELCs. So the same, we follow the standard and competencies from the curriculum guide in the K-12. How to use MELC in mother tongue. First, subtask the MELCs. Example in grade 2, quarter 1. In MELC, give the summary of a story. The sub-competencies we have give the main idea of a story or a poem, give the correct sequence of 3 to 5 events in a story, and note important details in grade level narrative text, character, setting, plot, or the problem and resolution. Next, reteach the MELCs as needed. Yes, it doesn't mean that it is already been taught, no need of having a reteach. We need to reteach because if it is not mastered or the lesson or competency not being mastered by our learners. Though we do not have face-to-face, but we can provide our learners additional activity sheets in support to the results of the activities given in the modules. Decide on the duration of MELCs depending on the needs of the learner. You have to know first the needs of our learners before you give the time or the length of using the MELCs in a week. The same as in the kindergarten, our competencies or the MELCs provided to us is in 10 weeks. Since we only have 8 weeks in the calendar of activities for the school year, we have to merge clustered that are related to each other, especially on the domains in mother tongue. For that, I will leave you this saying from Nelson Mandela. It always seems impossible until it's done. Good day, everyone. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sir Henry Valladares, Principal of Bartolome Integrated School. So,
Yes, thank you.
Sir Henry discussed about mother tongue, which is basically for grades 1, 2, and 3, which emphasizes oracy, communication, thus improving the literacy and the reading ability of our learners. Yes, Sir Jermaine?
Yes, that's correct. So, by the way, we have 17 live viewers here, and I think dadami pa yan. Kindly um, copy the links from your co-teachers na lang siguro, and submit also your attendance for this afternoon because we have different links, different from this morning breakout session.
That's right, Sir Jermaine, because we are expecting 30 to 40 participants for our elementary department. So please share the link provided to all your co-teachers. Thank you very much.
Naningkamot po na sila, ma'am, kay. Lisod din yung mga signal sa tuwang eskwelahan. Matuok ba
Yes.
ni?
So, hello nga pala kay Ma'am Tita. Sabi niya na mahirap daw masyado ang signal sa kanyang, saan ka ba ngayon, Tita? So, one thing also that I learned about Sir Henry is that in milk, we need to reteach it. It is not, if it is not mastered, we need to reteach it by providing remediation and worksheets. So I think we will proceed with the next subject learning area, Sir Jermaine. Who's our next speaker?
Yes, to share to us the MELCs of English, let's welcome Ma'am Maria Jorici O. Simafranca.
To our Public Schools District Supervisor, Dr. Janito O. Galan, our beloved Principal, Ma'am Leia M. Camilotes, to all school principals, school heads, cluster consultants, cluster coordinators, teachers of Cluster 6, a pleasant day to all. I am Maria Juresi Simafranca, the Cluster 6 English Coordinator, and I will be discussing the most essential competencies for English. Today, as we face the new normal, the Department of Education continues to adapt and keep up with the changes. From our original curriculum guide, we now have our most essential competencies, or the MELCs, to ensure that all grade level standards are still achieved despite the shortened academic year. However, the MELCS is not a direct response to the current pandemic. In fact, MELCS has been identified by the Bureau of Curriculum Development for the past 18 months. Experts and specialists have worked hand in hand to come up with essential learning competencies. The ELC are carefully chosen and has undergone validation taking into account that it is contextualized. As we discuss the MELCs, let us also clarify some terms and concepts which are essential in understanding the totality of the most essential competencies. Here are some of the characteristics of an essential learning competency. First one, it is aligned with the national, state, and/or local standards or frameworks. It connects the content to higher concepts across content areas. It is applicable to real-life situations. It is more important than other LCs. Lastly, it is not expected to be learned from parents or communities. Therefore, it would not be expected for most students to learn this other than a formal education. The question now is, how did they choose the essential learning competencies? What criteria did they consider? To answer that, experts in the field use the endurance criterion. A learning competency is considered enduring if it remains with learners long after tests or unit of study is completed. In English, examples of such learning competencies include research skills, reading comprehension, writing, map reading, and hypothesis testing. These are essential in many professions and in everyday life. Now, which LCs were considered enduring? It is considered enduring if LCs work in close association with other competencies in other subjects. maintaining the curricular quality of integration. Example, grade 4, quarter 1. Identify different meanings of content-specific words, denotation, and connotation. In teaching literature, the word blue may refer to a certain emotion or it may mean sadness. However, in science, color blue is simply a color. Next, another thing, an LC that does not recur or recurrence is limited per key stage while observing spiral progression. Example, key stage 2, grade 6, quarter 2, detect biases and propaganda devices used by speakers. Key stage 3, grade 8, quarter 3, examine biases for or against made by the author. This is not enduring since the LC recurred in key stage 2 and 3. Let us also bear in mind that our LCs can be taught more than once, depending on the needs of our learners, and as long as all competencies are achieved in a specific grade level. Now, which LCs again were considered enduring? Those LCs of the same nature that can be clustered together. So we have here an example. English grade 4, quarter 1. These are the competencies from our curriculum guide. Note details in literary text, listen to. Note details in selection, listen to. Note details in asking, answering, poem, listen to. So these three competencies are clustered into one. So we now have note significant details of various text types. Since the competencies are clustered, meaning to say, unpacking and subtasking should be used so that bigger and broader LCs can be broken down into manageable sub-competencies. Example, use a variety of informative, persuasive, and argumentative writing techniques. This would entail a number of other competencies in order for it to be achieved. First one, making a stand for persuasive. Second, gathering information for various sources and citing sources of information. So this is an example of subtasking or unpacking of this competency. I hope that is clear. Now, our competencies can be suggestive in nature. The duration of an LC is relative. What is required is that the list of competencies be achieved in the specific grade level. Later on, I will show you an example of how our MELCs are arranged in such a way that the duration of an LC becomes relative. So this is now a comparison of our most essential learning competencies and our current curriculum guide. So this is how our curriculum guide looks like. Now take note, in our curriculum guide, we consider the program standard, the grade level standard, the content standard, and the performance standard. It also follows a horizontal alignment. So we have here the time, week 1, and then all domains should be met by week 1. Now let us take a look at the number of competencies in our curriculum guide compared to our most essential learning competencies. So we have here grade 1. From 56, we now have 12. Grade 2, 234 to 34. Grade 3, 275 to 46. Grade 4, 307 to 28. Grade 5, 432 to 15. Grade 6, 388. We are now down to 10. Grade 7, 356 to 29. Grade 8, 389 to 22. Grade 9, 370 to only 10. And grade 10, 313 to 23. In total, our current CG has 3,120, and our most essential competencies is now down to 229. How were the MELCs organized? It should be noted that domains were no longer retained as they may cause confusion among end users. The original curriculum guide was designed in such a way that domains work together through horizontal alignment, since one lesson does not tackle only one macro skill, but multiple skills. However, during the examination of LCs using endurance criterion, some skills under a particular domain can no longer be retained. Organizing the MELCs by domain through columns, as in the original curriculum guide, would render the document seemingly incomplete and harder to follow due to the absence of horizontal alignment. So just like our arrangement of our MELCs here, we no longer have the domains. So the MELCs were organized or arranged in a list based on cognitive demand, which makes way for better curriculum flexibility as teachers are able to freely integrate LCs without the restrictions of horizontal alignment. So we now have the grading period and then the learning competencies. No domains, no week number. How were MELCs organized? Because the content and performance standards in the English curriculum are described in such detail, the process of determining the MELCs required that some of these standards be forgone. So we no longer use the content standard and the performance standard. For the MELCs, we only have the grade level standard. So as you can see, this is our original curriculum guide. We do away with the horizontal alignment and we only have the arrangement of MELCs that I've shown you a while ago. Now let us have a walkthrough of the MELCs. So Key Stage 1, grades 1 to 3. Here are the grade level standards. These are taken from the curriculum guide. Grade 1, the learner listens for comprehension, speaks clearly and uses appropriate expressions in talking about oneself, family, and other social context interactions. Grade 2, the learner listens critically to 1 to 2 paragraphs, use appropriate expressions in varied situations, read text for pleasure and information critically in meaningful thought units, responds properly to environmental prints like signs, posters, commands, and requests, and writes legibly simple sentences and messages in cursive form. Grade 3, the learner listens critically to get information from texts heard, demonstrates independence in using the basic language structure in oral and written communication, and reads in with comprehension. So as you can see, some competencies were merged, retained, or dropped. So the process of deciding whether a learning competency is to be retained, merged, dropped, or rephrased, as a general rule, a learning competency was retained if it satisfies the endurance criterion, which greatly contributes to lifelong learning and is prerequisite skill to the next grade level. 2 or more learning competencies are merged or clustered into one comprehensive learning competency if they have the same objective or learning intention. A significant number of learning competencies were removed, dropped due to the following reasons. They are too specific and the articulation is similar to that of a learning objective. They are deemed appropriate to be introduced in an earlier quarter or grade level or moved to a later quarter or grade level. They are recurring. They are subsumed in another learning competency. So those are the things that were considered, why some milks are retained, rephrased, or dropped. So we have here an example of the milk, English to third quarter. So we have here, these are similar, therefore it is retained or rephrased as melts. Read phrases, short sentences, and short stories consisting of words in short E-A-I-O-U, and then answer the who, what, and where questions about them. Next one, this is an example of LC, which is dropped from our milks. Use common expressions and polite greetings. Justification. During the curriculum review in 2019, this is one of the LCs tagged as desirable and was therefore no longer returned as a milk. Another one, review reading and writing, short A-E-I-O-U words in CBC pattern. This is an example of an LC from the CG that is retained to ensure a smooth flow of transition from reading to writing. Thus, a review of the short sounds is necessary. This will also be helpful in case all the short sounds were covered in previous levels. So it's like a prerequisite skill. Now, next stage, or the key stage 2 for grades 4 to 6. So we have here the grade level standards. Grade 4, the learner listens critically to various text types and express ideas accurately in both oral, written forms, demonstrates confidence in the use of the language to meet everyday needs, and reads independently and gets relevant information from various texts. Grade 5, the learner listens critically to different text types, including news reports and other radio broadcasts, reads independently and gets relevant information from various text types, expresses ideas accurately and logically in oral and written forms, demonstrates interest in reading, and confidence in the use of the language to meet various everyday needs. Grade 6, the learner listens critically, communicates feelings and ideas orally and in writing with a high level of proficiency, and reads various text types, materials to serve learning needs in meeting a wide range of life's purposes. So we have here English grade 4, quarter 1, an example of competencies which were clustered into one. So for vocabulary, use context clues to find meaning of unfamiliar words. Use context clues, synonyms to find meaning of unfamiliar words. Use context clues, synonyms to find meaning of unfamiliar words. Use context clues, this time antonym, to determine the meaning of unfamiliar words. Lastly, use context clues for definition to determine the meaning of unfamiliar words. Now, these are all similar, therefore it can be clustered into one, and we now have our new essential learning competency, use context clues to find meanings of unfamiliar words. Take note, if a competency is clustered, you have to unpack or subtask. Now let's have another example for English 4, quarter 1. Show willingness and enthusiasm in reading or listening to a literary text. All LCs under the attitude domain were deleted, as this may be subsumed in another learning area, example ESP, that focuses on attitude formation. This one is learning competency which was retained. Write or compose an editorial. The identified LC was considered a milk and therefore retained because it satisfied the endurance criterion, which states that the learning competency should play a role in lifelong learning. In particular, given the cognitive demand of the LC, unpacking it would necessitate a number of other essential learning competencies. We have here making a stand, developing arguments, supporting claims with evidence, and etc. because it is an editorial. Next, key stage 3 for grades 7 to 10. We have here the grade level standards. Grade 7. The learner demonstrates communicative competence through his or her understanding of Philippine literature and other text types for a deeper appreciation of Philippine culture. Grade 8, the learner demonstrates communicative competence through his or her understanding of Afro-Asian literature and other text types for a deeper appreciation of Philippine culture and those of other countries. Grade 9, the learner demonstrates communicative competence through his or her understanding of British American literature, including Philippine literature and other text types for a deeper appreciation of Philippine culture and those of other countries. Grade 10, the learner demonstrates communicative competence through his or her understanding of literature and other text types for a deeper appreciation of world literature, including Philippine literature. Now take a look at from our CG. Since these LCs develop skills on employing a variety of interpersonal communication,
So thank you, Ma'am Jorise Simapranca,
Thank you,
for
ma'am.
the English subject learning area.
Yes. We cut it because
Yes.
nag-continue siya. Natalakay niya yung 7 hanggang grade 10.
Mm. So we have here live Ma'am Joris Simapranca. Hello po, Ma'am. Good afternoon.
hi po, good
Good afternoon,
afternoon,
ma'am.
Ma'am Joanna and Sir Germs.
Hi po. Any
Hi.
additional inputs for the English subject?
Okay, for an additional input, since we already have the curriculum guide, let us always consider that we can always go back to our curriculum guide, especially when we want to unpack or subtask our clustered competencies. So we can always refer back to our curriculum guide. Another thing, just like what we had yesterday with the regional dry run, it was mentioned that if you think that the module is not enough to really explain the concepts that you want the learner to learn, you may modify or add some activities. So that
Yes.
would be all. Thank you so much for the time and participation.
Thank you, Ma'am Joris.
Yes.
Yes,
So,
Sir Jeremy?
according to ma'am, curriculum guides are still usable even though we have melts already.
Yes. As teachers, we can be creative and we can subtask the other competencies. Are we right, Ma'am Joyce?
Yes, ma'am. You can always subtask and unpack. Although there are already modules provided by our division or the central office, we can still use some maybe approach or activities which we think is appropriate to our learners because it's the teachers who really know their learners. So the type of
Yes.
approach or activity that is applicable to the learners.
Yes. So we can localize and contextualize basing of our learners' needs.
Yes, as long
Yes.
as it is still aligned with our most
Yes.
essential learning competencies.
Thank you po, Ma'am Joyce. And once again, good afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am.
So right now, Sir Jermaine, we will have another subject learning area, which is the math. We have mathematics for Filipino. At this moment, we will have Filipino. Yes. Let's all welcome Miss Jolly Ann Laurete for the Filipino subject learning area.
Isang maalab na pagbati sa inyong lahat, lalong-lalo na sa ating Cluster 6 PLPS, Dr.
Kaya
Janito
naman,
Ulugan,
survive pa.
sa aming mga
Wala ulit.
punong guro, at maging sa aking kapwa-guro na nagtuturo ng asignaturang Filipino. Ako nga po pala si Binibining Julian B. Laurito at kasalukuyang nagtuturo sa paaralang Los Amigos National High School. Nasa pangalawang araw na tayo ng ating webinar at ako po ang inatasang maglahad sa inyo ukol sa oryentasyon ng pinakamahalagang kasanayang pampagkatuto sa Filipino mula baitang 1 hanggang 6 o nasa antas ng elementarya. Sa pamumuno po ng ating pansangay na tagamasid na si Dr. Rene P. Sultan, narito po at sabay-sabay nating tunghayan.
Narito tayo ngayon sa oryentasyon sa paggamit ng pinakamahalagang kagamitang kasanayang pampagkatuto sa Pilipino from grade 1 to grade 12. Unang-una, balikan natin ang conceptual na balangkas sa Pilipino. Ibig sabihin, nasa mga teorya ng pagkatuto ng wika, nakaangkla ang pag-aaral at pagtuturo ng Pilipino. Nasa mga teorya ng pagkatuto ng wika, nakaangkla ang pag-aaral at pagtuturo ng Pilipino. Nasa sentro ng programa ang mga mag-aaral bilang pangunahing beneficiary ng ating pagtuturo. At inaasahan natin na sila ay magiging buo at ganap na Pilipino na may kapaki-pakinabang na literacy. Sa ating mga mag-aaral, dapat malinang sa kanila ang tatlong bagay na ito. Una, kakayahang komunikatibo. Pangalawa, reflektibo, mapanuring pag-iisip. At ang pangatlo, pagpapahalagang pampanitikan. Paano natin malilinang ang mga ito? Ito ay malilinang sa pamamagitan ng mga babasahin at teknolohiya. At ang pangunahing kalalabasan nito ay malinang sa kanila ang pambansang pagkakakilanlan, kultural na literacy at patuloy na pagkatuto. Ganon din, makaagapay sila sa mabilis na pagbabagong nagaganap sa daigdig. Ang Filipino, dati-rati na may kasanayan na umabot mahigit 2,000, ngayon ay pinaikli natin. At lumabas nga ang mga lalong kapaki-pakinabang na mga kasanayang pampagkatuto sa Filipino. Meron tayong 2,378 o 2,378 mga kasanayan. Ngayon ay naging 708 na lang na mga kasanayan sa Pilipino mula unang baitang hanggang baitang 12. Paano natin pinili ang mga makabuluhan o kapaki-pakinabang na competency sa Pilipino? Ang unang pamantayan o ang natatanging pamantayan na ating ginawa ay ang endurance o pagiging pangmatagalan ng mga kasanayan. Pangmatagalan sapagkat kapaki-pakinabang ito sa pag-aaral ng iba't ibang kasanayan, maaaring sa ibang asignatura o sa iba pang mga subkasanayan sa Pilipino. Makikita natin ito sa mga kasanayan sa pananaliksik, pagbasa, pagsulat, pagbasa ng mga mapa, hypothesis testing o pagsubok ng mga palagay. Endurance, ibig sabihin, nagagamit sa totoong buhay. Halimbawa nito ay makikita natin sa Pilipino sa ika-5 baitang na ibabahagi ang pangyayaring nasaksihan o naobserbahan. Ang kasanayang ito ay makikita din natin sa iba pang baitang o maging sa iba pang mga asignatura na mga wikang panturo ay Filipino, katulad ng Araling Panlipunan, Edukasyon sa Pagkakatao at EPP. Pangalawa, pangmatagalan din kung ito ay lubhang kailangan upang matutuhan pa ang mga kasanayan sa ibang asignatura gaya ng nabanggit ko kanina. Isinaalang-alang din ang pagsasakatuparan ng mga pamantayan sa bawat baitang sa mga key stages natin. Anong nangyari sa mga kasanayan na nasa curriculum natin dati? May mga competencies or mga kasanayan na pinanatili, may mga pinagsama, may mga tinanggal, at may inayos. Ngayon, tingnan natin, ano ang nangyari sa ating mga kasanayan sa unang mga baitang 1 hanggang 3. Titingnan natin ano ang nangyari sa mga kasanayang pampagkatuto na ito. Halimbawa, sa unang baitang, sa gawing kaliwa, may tatlong kasanayang pampagkatuto. Una, nasasagot ang mga tanong tungkol sa napakinggang pabula. Pangalawa, nasasagot ang mga tanong tungkol sa napakinggang tugma o tula. Pangatlo, nasasagot ang mga tanong tungkol sa napakinggang tekstong pang-impormasyon. Kung inyong napapansin, isang kasanayan ang nililinang sa tatlong ito at yan ay ang pagsagot sa mga tanong tungkol sa napakinggang teksto o nabasang teksto. Anong ginawa? Ang tatlong kompetensi na ito ay pinagsama, merge or cluster. Anong dahilan? Isa lamang ang kasanayang pampagkatuto ang nais linangin ng kasanayan. So, titingnan natin kung ano na ang pinakamahalagang kasanayang pampagkatuto. Binago na natin ito, naging nasasagot ang mga tanong tungkol sa napakinggang pabula, tugma at mga tekstong pang-impormasyon. Halimbawa sa ikalawang baitang, may apat na kasanayang pampagkatuto. Una, nagagamit ang mga naunang kaalaman o karanasan sa pag-unawa ng napakinggang teksto. Nagagamit ang naunang kaalaman o karanasan sa pag-unawa ng napakinggang teksto. Nagagamit ang naunang kaalaman o karanasan sa pag-unawa ng napakinggang teksto. Kung titingnan natin, ang apat ay paulit-ulit na nakikita natin sa ating curriculum guide. So anong ginawa? Yung una ay pinanatili natin, samantalang yung tatlo ay pinalitan or tinanggal natin sa ating CG. At ang lumabas na pinakamahalagang kasanayang pampagkatuto ay nagagamit ang naunang kaalaman o karanasan sa pag-unawa ng napakinggang teksto. Tingnan natin ang halimbawa sa ikatlong baitang. Ano ang nangyari sa ilan sa ating mga competencies? May apat na mga kasanayang pampagkatuto. Like una, na isasalaysay muli ang napakinggang teksto, na isalaysay muli ang napakinggang teksto sa tulong ng mga pamatnubay na tanong, na isasalaysay muli ang binasang teksto sa tamang pagkasunod-sunod, na isasalaysay muli ang napakinggang teksto sa tulong ng mga balangkas. Now, sa apat na ito, isa ang common sa kanila, ang pagsasalaysay muli sa mga napakinggang teksto. So, ang ginawa natin sa ibang mga competency ay tinanggal at inayos natin ang mga ito. At meron tayong bago na MELC na isasalaysay muli ang napakinggang teksto ng may tamang pagkasunod-sunod ng mga pangyayari sa tulong ng pamatnubay na tanong at balangkas. Tingnan natin sa ikaapat na baitang, anong nangyari sa ating mga kasanayang pampagkatuto. Ito ay nasa pangalawang estado o baitang, stage 4 to 6. May competency tayong pinagsama. Katulad nito, nasasabi ang sanhi at bunga ayon sa pahayag. Naibibigay ang sanhi at bunga sa pangyayaring napakinggang teksto. Naibibigay ang sanhi at bunga ng nangyayari at napakinggang ulat. Kung titingnan natin, pagtukoy sa mga sanhi at bunga mula sa tekstong nabasa or mula sa mga napakinggan, kaya binago natin ito. Ano na ang bagong MELC natin? Nasasabi ang sanhi at bunga ayon sa nabasang pahayag, napakinggang teksto at napakinggang mga ulat. Tingnan natin sa ikalamang baitang. At makikita natin dito ano ang mga pagbabago, ilan sa mga pagbabago na nasa ating curriculum. May tatlong mga kasanayang pampagkatuto kung nakikita rin sa screen. Una, nasusunod ang 2 hanggang 3 hakbang na panuto. Pangalawa, nasasagot ang mga literal na tanong tungkol sa napakinggang kwento na ipagmamalaki ang sariling wika sa pamamagitan ng paggamit nito. Now, ang mga kompetensyeng ito ay tinanggal natin sa ikalimang baitang. Ano ang dahilan? Una, sa unang nakitang kasanayan, paulit-ulit na sa unang yugto. Ibig sabihin, nakita na natin sa stage 1, na-repeat na rin sa stage 2, kaya ang tinanggal natin. Ang kompetensyeng ito ay kasama na rin sa iba pang mga kompetency na ukol sa pag-unawa ng iba't ibang teksto. Kasi nga isa sa mga domain ay pag-unawa sa napakinggan, pag-unawa sa binasa. Kaya tinanggal natin ang competency ito dahil nga paulit-ulit na siyang lumabas sa ating mga kasahanay na makasanayang pampagkatuto. Tingnan natin sa huling antas, baitang 6. Ang mga kasanayang ito ay pinagsama katulad ng mga nauna, katulad ng grade 1 o unang baitang, na may mga kasanayan tayong pinagsama. Halimbawa, nasasagot ang mga tanong tungkol sa napakinggang pabula, nasasagot ang mga tanong tungkol sa napakinggang kwento, nasasagot ang mga tanong tungkol sa tekstong pang-impormasyon, nasasagot ang mga tanong tungkol sa napakinggang usapan. Titingnan natin, isa lang ang tinutumbok ng kasanayan, pagsagot sa mga tanong. Nagkakaiba lamang sila sa mga genre or mga tekstong pampanitikang ating pinag-aaralan. Kaya ang ginawa ay pinag-isa natin ang mga kasanayang ito. Tingnan natin, nasasagot ang mga tanong tungkol sa mga nabasa or napakinggang pabula, kwento, tekstong pang-impormasyon at usapan. Yun po ang nasa unang baitang hanggang ika-6 na baitang. Napakahalaga pa rin sa Pilipino o sa alinmang asignatura na himayin natin ang ating most essential learning competencies para sa mga tiyak na kasanayang pampagkatuto. Ibig sabihin ng himayin, isa-isahin natin ano ba ang mga kaakibat na mga sub-competencies para sa bawat isang MELC. Tingnan natin. Ito halimbawa, nagagamit ng wasto ang mga pangalan at panghalip sa pagtalakay tungkol sa sarili, tao, hayop, lugar, bagay at pangyayari sa paligid, sa usapan at paglalahad ng tungkol sa karanasan. So maari natin itong himayin, katulad ng tukuyin muna natin ang kahulugan ng pangalan at panghalip. Maaring magbibigay tayo ng halimbawa sa dalawang bahagi ng pananalitang ito. Maaring magbibigay tayo ng reaksyon sa isang usapin at maaring magsasalaysay tayo ng isang karanasan. Nakita natin ang isang competency ay hinimay natin. Nagkaroon tayo ng mga sub-competency ukol sa pangalawa, pagbibigay kahulugan, halimbawa, at pagbibigay ng reaksyon o pagsasalaysay ng karanasan. Yan. Ulitin ang ilang MELC sa iba pang markahan sa bawat baitang kung kinakailangan o lalong paglinang nito. Ang tawag natin mga essential, enabling competencies. Diba? O kung nagkakaroon na sila ng talakayan tungkol sa mga pang-abay, maaring balikan muna ang mga salitang naglalarawan. Maaring pag-aralan muna ang makasanayan ukol sa mga salitang kilos. Okay. Pumili ng mga magkasamang MELC na sasakto sa 8 linggo. Kasi nga yun ang ating takdang panahon. We are given 8 weeks bawat markahan. Titingnan natin ano ang mga kasanayang pampagkatuto, mga lalong mahalagang kasanayang pampagkatuto na dapat nating malinang sa loob ng isang markahan. Maaring sumangguni pa rin tayo sa ating gabay pang-kurikulum para sa pagpapasya. At mahalaga, matarget natin ang mga kasanayang pampagkatuto sa bawat baitang. Yun ang pinakatunguhin natin. Matarget natin or malinang natin sa ating mga mag-aaral ang mga kasanayang pampagkatuto na dapat matutuhan nila sa loob ng isang markahan o sa loob ng isang baitang. Bukod sa pagsangguni sa gabay pang kurikulum, mahalaga rin ang natitingnan natin ang pagpapasyang pagsama-sama ng MELC na sumangguni tayo sa final na version ng ating most essential learning competencies kung saan makikita natin ang mga code dito. Ang mga code ay nagsasabi kung ano-anong learning competencies ang pinagsama-sama sa isang MELC. Paalala, bibigyang halaga pa rin natin ang mga guro na makapili ng magkakasamang learning competency sa bawat linggo. Alam natin ang uri ng mga mag-aral meron tayo at alam natin ang takbo ng kanilang pagkakatuto. So, ang teacher, ang guro mismo ang may kakayahang magpasya. Aling mga kasanaya ang dapat malinang ko sa bawat linggo at gaano o ilang araw ang iuukol ko sa pagtuturo ng nasabing kasanayan. Ang layunin ng pagpili ng MELC ay hindi upang palitan ang kasalukuyang curriculum guide, kundi magabayan ang mga guro sa pagtukoy ng mga competency mas kinakailangan ng mga mag-aaral para sa taong panuruan 2020 hanggang 2021. Hinihikayat pa rin ang mga guro na sumangguni sa ating curriculum guide sa Pilipino, yung ating gabay pang curriculum sa Pilipino. So, sa Pilipino, aasahan pa rin natin na matatapos yung ating tunguhin na makapagbibigay tayo ng mga mag-aaral na buo, ganap, na may kapakipakinabang na literacy.
At natunghayan niyo po ang komprehensibong paglahad ng ating pansangay na tagamasid na si Dr. Rene P. Sultan ukol sa pinakamahalagang kasanayang pangpagkatuto sa Filipino mula sa antas ng elementarya. Lagi lamang po nating tandaan na layunin nitong makapagbibigay tayo sa mga mag-aaral ng buo at ganap na may kapaki-pakinabang na literacy. Maraming salamat po.
Ayan. Thank you at natapos na rin ang presentation ng MELCs ng Filipino.
Yes. So sabi nga ni Sir Sultan na ang mga competencies ay pinagsama at tinanggal para mas magkaroon tayo ng focus sa ating mga iba't ibang mahalagang competencies. Pero sabi nga niya na hindi ito palitan, ngunit para magabayan lamang ang ating guro sa mga kompetensyang makatulong sa ating mga kabataan.
Isa lang din sa napansin ko kanina pa sa English at ngayon sa Filipino ay kung paano na pinili yung MELCs ay sa pamamagitan ng criteria na ito, ang endurance, na kung saan
Yes, sir.
ito ay kailangan may makita talaga na magagamit ng mga estudyante at may lifelong learning.
Yes, importante talaga yung lifelong learning, sir. So, pa-shout out naman tayo sa meron tayong new comments, Sir Jermaine, from Mary Ann Generale from Carmen Integrated School. So, sabi niya, hello po, and also from Lolita Castillo. Mahina po daw yung signal sa kanila, sir.
Oo.
Sige
Mahina
lang, at least they
putol-putol.
tried. Diba? At least they tried.
Oo nga.
So, hello po. Good afternoon po sa inyong lahat.
Laban na.
laban lang sa signal. So, at this juncture, we will be presenting the next subject, which is the mathematics. Represented by John Colton of Mintal Comprehensive National High School.
Good day, everyone. By the way, I'm John Paul Tan of Mintal Comprehensive High School, and I will be presenting to you the most essential learning competencies in mathematics for the elementary level. The most essential learning competencies in mathematics. For grade 1 mathematics, on the first quarter, the content standards, the learner demonstrates understanding of whole numbers up to 100, ordinal numbers up to 10, and money up to 100 pesos. For the performance standards, there are two. First is the learner is able to recognize, represent, and order whole numbers up to 100, and money up to 100 pesos in various forms and contexts. And number two, the learner is able to recognize and represent ordinal numbers up to 10 in various forms and contexts. There are 9 most essential learning competencies for that first quarter. So it is divided from the learner visualizes, represents, and counts numbers from 0 to 100 using a variety of materials and methods, and it will end up on the 9th week with the learner recognizes and compares coins and bills up to 100 pesos and their notations. For the second quarter, the content standards is the learner demonstrate understanding of addition and subtraction of all numbers up to 100, including money. And then the performance standards, the learner is able to apply addition and subtraction of whole numbers up to 100, including money, in mathematical problems and real-life situations. Then it was divided into the most essential learning for this is divided into 8 weeks, and it will start with the learner illustrates addition as putting together or combining or joining sets, and it will end up with the learner visualizes, represents, and solves routine and non-routine problems involving subtraction of whole numbers, including money, with minuends up to 99, with and without regrouping using appropriate problem solving strategies and tools. For the third quarter, for content standards, the learner demonstrates understanding of fractions 1/2 and 1/4. Then it also has the learner demonstrates understanding of two-dimensional and three-dimensional figures and demonstrate understanding of continuous and repeating patterns and mathematical sentences. The performance standard, the learner is able to recognize, represents, and compare fractions 1/2 and 1/4 in various forms and contexts, and the learner is able to describe, compare, and construct two-dimensional and three-dimensional objects. And the last part is the learner is able to apply knowledge of continuous and repeating patterns and numbers, sentences in various situations. For the most essential learning competencies, it is divided into 9, and it will start with the learner counts groups of equal quantity using a concrete objects up to 50 and write an equivalent expression, example, two groups of 5. And it will end up on the ninth week with the learner visualizes and find the missing numbers in an addition or subtraction sentence using a variety of ways. Example, n plus 2 equals 5, 5 minus n equals 3. On the fourth quarter, for the grade 1 mathematics, the content standards is the learner demonstrate understanding of time and non-standard units of length, mass, and capacity. The learner demonstrate understanding of pictographs without scales and outcomes of an event. The performance standards are the learner is able to apply knowledge of time and non-standard measures of length, mass, and capacity in mathematical problems and real-life situations, and the learner is able to interpret simple representation of data, tables, and pictographs without scales. There are 9 most essential learning competencies out of that one. So the first is the learner tells the days in a week, months in a year, and in the right order. And it will end up with the learner solves routine and non-routine problems using data presented in pictograph without scales. For grade 2 mathematics, for the first quarter, the content standards are the learner demonstrates understanding of whole numbers up to 1,000, ordinal numbers up to 28, and money up to 100 pesos. And number 2, demonstrate understanding of addition of whole numbers up to 1,000, including money. The performance standards are the learner is able to recognize, represent, compare, and order whole numbers up to 1,000, ordinal numbers up to 28, and money up to 100 pesos in various forms and contexts. Number 2, the learner is able to recognize and represent ordinal numbers up to 28 in various forms and contexts. And number 3, the learner is able to apply addition of all numbers up to 1,000, including money, in mathematical problems and real-life situations. On the first quarter, the most essential learning competencies is divided into 9 weeks, starting with the learning identifies, reads, and writes ordinal numbers from first through the 20th object in a given set from a given point of reference, and it will end up on the ninth week with the learner solves routine and non-routine problems involving addition of whole numbers, including money with sums up to 1,000 using appropriate problem solving strategies and tools. For the second quarter, the learner demonstrates understanding of subtraction and multiplication of whole numbers up to 1,000 including money, And the performance standards is the learner is able to apply subtraction and multiplication of whole numbers up to 1,000, including money, in mathematical problems and real-life situation. For the second quarter, it is divided into 9 weeks as well, the most essential learning competencies. It will start with the learner visualizes, represents, and subtracts 2 to 3-digit numbers with minuends up to 999 without and with regroupings. And it will end up with the learner solves routine and non-routine problems using appropriate problem-solving strategies and tools, which is A, multiplication of whole numbers, including money, and B, multiplication and addition or subtraction of whole numbers, including money. For third quarter, the content standards will be the learner demonstrate understanding of division of the whole numbers up to 1,000, including money. Second, the, the learner demonstrates understanding of unit fractions. And third, the learner demonstrates understanding of straight and curved lines, flat and curved surfaces, and basic shapes. And the learner demonstrates understanding of continuous patterns using two attributes. The performance standards will be as follows. Number one, the learner is able to apply division of whole numbers up to 1,000, including money in mathematical problems and real-life situation. Number two, the learner is able to recognize and represent unit fractions in various forms and contexts. Number three, the learner is able to recognize and construct straight and curved lines, flat and curved surfaces, and basic shapes. And last is the learner is able to apply knowledge of continuous patterns using attributes. The most essential learning competencies is divided into 9 weeks. So it will start with the learner visualizes and represents divisions and write a related equation for each type of situation. Equal sharing, repeated fractions, equal jumps on the number line, and formation of equal groups of objects. And it will end up with the learner determines the missing term or terms in a given continuous patterns using two attributes, which is any of the following figures, numbers, colors, sizes, and orientation, etc. Example 1A, 2B, 3C, and so on and so forth. For the fourth quarter, the content standards, the learner demonstrates understanding of time, standard measures of length, mass, and capacity, and area using square tile units. And the second one is the learner deepens understanding of pictographs without and with scales. The performance standards, the learner are using square tile units in mathematical problems and real-life situations. And the learner is able to interpret simple representations of data like pictographs without and with scales. So for the fourth quarter, it is divided again, the most essential learning competencies is divided again into 9 weeks, and it will start with the learner tells and writes time in minutes, including AM and PM using analog and digital clocks. And it will end up with the learners infers and interprets data presented in a pictograph without and with scales, and solves routine and non-routine problems using data presented in a pictograph without and with scales. For grade 3 mathematics, the content standards are the following. The learner demonstrate understanding of whole numbers up to 10,000, ordinal numbers up to 100, and money up to 1,000 pesos. Number two, the learner demonstrate understanding of addition and subtraction of whole numbers, including money. For the performance standards, the learner is able to recognize, represent, compare, and order whole numbers up to 10,000 and money up to 1,000 pesos in various forms and contexts. And number two, the learner is able to recognize and represent ordinal numbers up to 100 in various forms and contexts. And number three, the learner is able to apply addition and subtraction of whole numbers, including money in mathematical problems and real-life situations. As you can see, the most essential learning competencies are divided into 9 weeks. It will start with the learner visualizes numbers up to 10,000 with emphasis on the numbers 1,001 to 10,000. And it will end up on the ninth week with the learner solves routine and non-routine problems involving subtraction without or with addition of whole numbers, including money using appropriate problems, solving strategies, and tools. For the second quarter, the content standards, the learner demonstrate understanding of multiplication and division of whole numbers, including money, and the performance standards, the learner is able to apply multiplication and division of whole numbers, including money, in mathematical problems and real-life situations. Again, the most essential learning competencies is divided into 9 weeks, and we'll start with the learner visualizes multiplication of numbers 1 to 10 by 6, 7, 8, and 9, and it will end up on the ninth week with the learner solves routine and non-routine problems involving division of 2 to 4-digit numbers by 1 to 2-digit numbers without or with any of the other operations of whole numbers, including money, using appropriate problems, solving strategies, and tools. For the third quarter, the content standards are the learner demonstrate understanding of proper and improper, similar and dissimilar, and equivalent fractions. The learner demonstrate understanding of lines and symmetrical designs. The learner demonstrate understanding of continuous and repeating patterns and mathematical sentences involving multiplication and division of whole numbers. And then the performance standards, the learner is able to recognize, represent proper and improper, similar and dissimilar, and equivalent fractions in various forms and contexts. Then, the learner is able to recognize and represent lines in real objects, designs or drawings, and complete symmetrical designs. And then, the learner is able to apply knowledge of continuous and repeating patterns and number sentences involving multiplication or division of whole numbers in various situations. So the most essential learning competencies is divided again into 9 weeks, starting with the learner identifies odd and even numbers, visualizes and represents fractions that are equal to 1 and greater than 1 using regions, sets, and number line. And then it will end up on the ninth week with the learner finds the missing value in a number sentence involving multiplication or division of whole numbers. Example, n times 7 equals 56, or 56 divided by n equals 8. For the fourth quarter, the content standards are the learner demonstrates understanding of conversion of time, linear, mass, and capacity, measures and area of squares and rectangle. And then the learner demonstrates understanding of bar graphs and outcomes of an event using the terms sure, likely, equally likely, unlikely, and impossible to happen. The performance standards are the learner is able to apply knowledge of conversion of time, linear, mass, and capacity, measures an area of rectangle and square in mathematical problems and real-life situations, as well as the learner is able to create and interpret simple representations of data, tables, and single bar graphs, and describes outcomes of familiar events using the terms sure, likely, equal likely, unlikely, and impossible to happen. The most essential learning competencies is divided into 9 weeks. So it will start with the learner visualizes, represents, and converts time measure from seconds to minutes, minutes to hours, and hours to a day, and vice versa. Next, days to weeks, months and year, and vice versa. Weeks to months and year, and vice versa. Months to year, and vice versa. And it will end up on the ninth week with the learner tells whether an event is sure, likely, equally likely, unlikely, and is impossible to happen. And the learner describes events in real life situation using the phrases sure to happen, likely to happen, equally likely to happen, unlikely to happen, and impossible to happen. For grade 4 mathematics, the content standards are the learner demonstrate understanding of whole numbers up to 100,000. Number two, the learner demonstrate understanding of multiplication and division of whole numbers, including money. And then the performance standards are the learner is able to recognize and represent whole numbers up to 100,000 in various forms and contexts. And number two is the learner is able to apply multiplication and division of whole numbers, including money, in mathematical problems and real-life situations. The most essential learning competencies are divided into 9 weeks. It will start with the learner visualizes numbers up to 100,000 with emphasis on numbers 10,001 up to 100,000. And then it will end up with the ninth week with the learner performs a series of two or more operations applying multiplication, division, addition, subtraction, particularly MDAS, correctly. On the second quarter, the content standards are the learner demonstrates understanding of factors and multiples and addition and subtraction of fraction. Number two, the learner demonstrates understanding of improper fractions, mixed numbers, and decimals. And then the performance standards are the learner is able to apply knowledge of factors and multiples and addition and subtraction of fraction in mathematical problems and real life situations. And number two, the learner is able to recognize and represent improper fraction, mixed numbers, and decimals. The most essential learning competencies is divided into 9 weeks again. And it will start with the learner identifies factors of a given number up to 100. And then it will end up with the learner rounds decimal numbers to the nearest whole numbers and 10 and compares and arranges decimal numbers. For the third quarter, the content standards are the learner demonstrate understanding of the concepts of parallel and perpendicular lines, angles, triangles, and quadrilaterals, and then the learner demonstrate understanding of concepts of continuous and repeating patterns and number sentences. And the last D will be the learner demonstrate understanding of the concept of time, perimeter, area, and volume. The performance standards are the learner is able to describe parallel and perpendicular lines, angles, triangles, and quadrilaterals. Then, the learner is able to apply, no, the learner is able to identify the missing element in a pattern and number sentence, and then the learner is able to apply the concept of time, perimeter, area, and volume to mathematical problems and real-life situations. Again, the most essential learning competencies is divided into 9 weeks. It will start with the learner describes and draws parallel, intersecting, and perpendicular lines using ruler and set square. And it will end up on the ninth week with the learner differentiates perimeter from area, converts square centimeters to square meters, and vice versa. For the fourth quarter, the content standards are the learner demonstrates understanding of the concepts of bar graphs and simple experiments. And then the performance standards will be the learner is able to create and interpret simple representations of data, tables and bars, and describes outcomes in simple experiments. Again, the most essential learning competencies is divided into 9 weeks, and we will start with the learner finds the area of irregular figures made up of squares and rectangles using square centimeters and square meters, and it will end up with the learner solves routine and non-routine problems involving a simple experiment. For grade 5 mathematics, for the first quarter, content standards, the learner demonstrate understanding of divisibility, order of operations, factors and multiples, and four fundamental operations involving fractions. The performance standards, the learner is able to apply divisibility, order of operations, factors and multiples, and the four fundamental operations involving fractions in mathematical problems and real-life situations. We have nine most essential learning competencies for first quarter, starting with the first week as the learner uses divisibility rules for 2, 5, and 10 to find the common factors of numbers, and it will end up with the learner solves routine or non-routine problems involving division without or with any of the other operations of fractions and whole numbers using appropriate problem-solving strategies and tools. For the second quarter, the content standards are the learner demonstrates understanding of decimals, demonstrate understanding of the four fundamental operations involving decimals and ratio and proportion, and then the performance standards will be number one, the learner is able to recognize and represent decimals in various forms and contexts, and is able to apply the four fundamental operations involving decimals and ratio and proportion in mathematical problems and real-life situations. There are nine most essential learning competencies, which is divided into 9 weeks. Starting with the learner gives the place value and the value of a digit of a given decimal number to 10,000s, and then it will end up with find the missing terms in a pair of equivalent ratios, defines and describes a proportion, and recognizes when two quantities are in direct proportion. For third quarter, the content standards are demonstrate understanding of percent, demonstrate understanding of polygons, circles, and solid figures, demonstrate understanding of the concept of sequence and solving simple equations, demonstrate understanding of time and circumference. For the performance standards, we have the learner is able to apply percent in mathematical problems and real-life situations. The learner is able to construct and describe polygons, circles, and solid figures. The learner is able to apply the knowledge of sequence in various situations and is able to use different problem-solving strategies. And then the learner is able to apply knowledge of time and circumference in mathematical problems and real-life situations. And then the most essential learning competencies again is divided into 9 weeks and starts with the learner visualizes percent and its relationship to fractions, ratios, and decimal numbers using models. And it will end up with the learner finds the circumference of a circle, solve routine and non-routine problems involving circumference of a circle. For the fourth quarter, the content standards are the learner demonstrates understanding of area, volume, and temperature, and demonstrate understanding of line, graphs, and experimental probability. For the performance standard, the learner is able to apply knowledge of area, volume, and temperature in mathematical problems and real-life situations, and the learner is able to create and interpret representations of data, tables, and line graphs, and apply experimental probability in mathematical problems and real-life situations. Again, the most essential learning competencies is divided into 9 weeks, and you start with the learner finds the area of a given circle, solves routine and non-routine problems involving the area of a circle, and it will end up with the learner analyzes data obtained from chance using experiments involving letter cards A to Z and number cards 0 to 20, and solves routine and non-routine problems involving experimental probability. For grade 6 mathematics, for the first quarter, the content standards are the learner demonstrates understanding of the four fundamental operations involving fractions and decimals, and the performance standards are The learner is able to apply the four fundamental operations involving fractions and decimals in mathematical problems and real-life situations. The most essential learning competencies is divided into 10 weeks. At first, the learner adds and subtracts simple fractions and mixed numbers without or with regrouping, and it will end up with the learner solves multi-step, routine, and non-routine problems involving division and any of the other operations of decimal, mixed decimals, and whole numbers, including money, using appropriate problem-solving strategies, and tools. For the second quarter, the content standards are the learner demonstrate understanding of order of operations, ratio and proportion, percent, exponent and integers, and the performance standards are the learner is able to apply knowledge of order of operations, ratio and proportion, percent, exponent, and integers in mathematical problems and real-life situations. The most essential learning competencies is divided again into 10 weeks. And it will start with the learner express one value as a fraction of another given the ratio and vice versa. And it will end up with the learner solves routine and non-routine problems involving basic operations of integers using appropriate strategies and tools. For the third quarter, the content standards are the learner demonstrates understanding of solid figures, the learner demonstrates understanding of sequence, forming rules, expressions, and equations, and the learner demonstrates understanding of rate and speed, and area and surface area of plane, solid, or space figures. The performance standards are the learner is able to construct and describe the different solid figures cube, prism, pyramid, cylinder, cone, and sphere. And then the learner is able to apply knowledge of the sequence, expressions, and equations in mathematical problems and real-life situations. And last, the learner is able to apply knowledge of speed, area, and surface area of plane and solid and space figures in mathematical problems and real-life situations. The most essential learning competencies is divided into 9 weeks. It will start with the learner visualizes and describes the different solid figures, cube, prism, pyramid, cylinder, cone, and sphere using various concrete and pictorial models, and it will end up with the learner solve word problems involving measurement of surface area. For the fourth quarter, the content standards are the learner demonstrates understanding of volume of solid figures and meter reading, and the learner demonstrates understanding of pie graphs and experimental probability. The performance standards are the learner is able to apply knowledge of volume of solid figures and meter reading in mathematical problems and real-life situations, and the learner is able to create and interpret representations of data, tables and pie, and graphs, and apply experimental probability in mathematical problems and real-life situations. The most essential learning competencies is divided into 9 weeks, and it will start with the learner determines the relationship of the volume between a rectangular prism and a pyramid, a cylinder and a cone, and a cylinder and a sphere. And it will end up with the learner solves routine and non-routine problems involving experimental and theoretical probability. Those are the most essential learning competencies for the elementary level. As you can see, I have only summarized everything because we have a limited time. So for those who want to have a soft copy, you might ask our cluster coordinator in mathematics, Sir Tuan, for the link or for the soft copy. Thank you and God bless. Back to you, Sir Tuan.
All right, thank you so much, Sir
Yes.
John Paul, in giving to us the summary of the Melks in mathematics.
Yes, so thank you very much, Sir John Paul from Minto Comprehensive National High School. So at this moment, we would like to say good afternoon to our viewers, Ma'am Teresita Bacos and Ma'am Christine Joy Lantixi from Bartolome Integrated School. So good afternoon po and hello sa lahat ng teachers from Bartolome IS and to all the integrated schools of Cluster 6.
Yes,
Yes, Sir
good
Shermin?
afternoon to everyone. So, ang Melks sa mathematics, pinaikli na lang. Ewan ko na lang kung
Yes.
hindi na mahirapan pa rin matuto yung mga estudyante natin pagdating ng Agosto 24.
Yes, feeling ko genius na yan sila, sir.
Yes.
So we will proceed with the science subject area to be given for us with ma'am. Let's welcome Rowena P. Espere.
My courtesy to our Public Schools District Supervisor, Dr. Junito Ogalan, to our Education Program Supervisor in Science, Ma'am Genevieve Faye Pasamonte, to our Cluster Science Consultant, Dr. Helen G. Reyno, to all the principals in Cluster 6, and to everyone who's watching us right now, good day. This will be the order of my presentation. First, we will have the presentation of the Science Curriculum Conceptual Framework, followed by the comparison on the number of learning competencies in science curriculum and the most essential learning competencies. Next, we will have a short discussion on how did the Department of Education Central Office trim down our learning competencies to come up with the most essential learning competencies. Then, we will have a walkthrough on the most essential learning competencies in science, and we will learn how to utilize them. Science education aims to develop scientific literacy among learners that will prepare them to be informed and participative citizens who are able to make judgments and decisions regarding applications of scientific knowledge that may have social, health, or environmental impacts. Whether or not students pursue careers that involve science and technology, the K-12 science curriculum will provide students with a repertoire of competencies important in the world of work and in a knowledge-based society. The K-12 science curriculum envisions the development of scientifically, technologically, and environmentally literate and productive members of society who manifest skills as critical problem solvers, responsible stewards of nature, innovative and creative citizens, informed decision makers, and effective communicators. This curriculum is designed around the three domains of learning science. We have understanding and applying scientific knowledge in local setting as well as global context whenever possible, performing scientific processes and skills, and developing and demonstrating scientific attitudes and values. The acquisition of these domains is facilitated using the following approaches: multi-interdisciplinary approach, science technology society approach, contextual learning, problem issue-based learning, and inquiry-based approach. The approaches are based on sound educational pedagogy, namely constructivism, social cognition learning model, learning style theory, and brain-based learning. The original number of learning competencies in the science curriculum per grade level are as follows. Grade 3, 33 learning competencies. Grade 4, 41 learning competencies. Grade 5, 31 learning competencies, and grade 6, 20 learning competencies. A total of 127 learning competencies for elementary level. The number of LCs varies per domain and per grade level. This is because of the intrinsic nature of the domain and the varying levels of the learning competencies crafted. The number of most essential learning competencies in science. Grade 3, 20 competencies. Grade 4, 23 competencies. Grade 5, 21 competencies. And grade 6, 16 competencies. A total of 80 most essential learning competencies in science for the elementary level. How did the Department of Education Central Office trim down the learning competencies to essential learning competencies? The department, through the Bureau of Curriculum Development, Curriculum Standards Development Division, in collaboration with the Assessment Curriculum and Technology Research Center, reviewed our curriculum, focused on the articulation within and across learning areas to identify gaps, issues, and concerns across learning areas and grade levels. Specifically, the review covers the following: mapping of the essential and desirable learning competencies within the curriculum, identification of prerequisite knowledge and skills needed to prepare students for essential learning competencies, and analysis of the interconnectedness of prerequisite knowledge and skills among the learning competencies for each subject area. In the example presented, most of the learning competencies are essential, which means these are what the students need, considered indispensable in the teaching learning process, to building skills, to equip learners for subsequent grade levels, and subsequently for lifelong learning. There are few learning competencies that are considered desirable. Desirable learning competencies may enhance education but may not be necessary in building foundational skills. The competency describe the internal structure of the earth is a desirable learning competency because the same contents were already introduced in grade 8. Another competency that is considered desirable is apply ray diagramming techniques in describing the characteristics and positions of images formed by lenses. The intent of the learning competency is the same as the competency preceding it. The learners can predict the qualitative characteristics of images formed by plane and curved mirrors and lenses through ray diagram. Hence, ray diagramming is already applied in preceding learning competency. From essential learning competencies to most essential learning competencies. These most essential learning competencies, or MELCs, were identified using the criterion endurance. Enduring competencies are those that remains with learners long after a test is completed. That is according to Reeves in 2002, or is useful beyond a single test or unit of study, according to Maney and Horrell in 2014. They also refer to learning competencies which are essential in many professions and in everyday life. Here, you can observe that there is a missing code. This means that the MELCs is either merged or rephrased. Two or more learning competencies are merged or clustered into one comprehensive learning competency if they have the same objective or learning intention. Certain competencies were rephrased to be more concise. Since they are merged, there is no code assigned for this merged competency. Below, you can see that competency 2 for grade 3 quarter 2 week 3 to 4 is dropped. This means that the competency may be subsumed in another learning competency or deemed appropriate to be introduced in an earlier quarter or grade level or moved to a later quarter or grade level. Grade level standards. Grade 3. Force and energy, earth and space. Learner can describe how objects move and what makes them move. They can also identify sources and describe uses of light, heat, sound, and electricity. Learner can describe changes in the conditions of their surroundings. These would lead learners to become more curious about their surroundings, appreciate nature, and practice health and safety measures. Learning Area Science Grade 3. Rephrased competency. Enumerate uses of light, sound, heat, and electricity. The revised competency is describe the different uses of light, sound, heat, and electricity in everyday life. Reason for revision. Rather than asking the learners to just list down, they were asked to describe the various uses of light, sound, heat, and electricity. Dropped competency. Describe the movements of objects such as fast and slow, forward and backward, stretching and compressing. Reason for dropping this competency. Terms referring to movement such as fast and slow or its direction such as forward and backward were already introduced in earlier grades. Example, an English competency. Determine the meaning of words using clues. Total physical response through body movements, context clues, etc. Another drop competency for Science Grade 3, describe the things found in the surroundings. The reason for dropping this competency. The concepts of environment was already introduced in kinder and in Araling Panlipunan. Grade level standards, grade 4. Force and energy, earth and space. Learner can investigate the effects of push or pull on the size, shape, and movement of an object. Learner can investigate which type of soil is best for certain plants and infer the importance of water in daily activities. They learned about what makes up weather and apply their knowledge of weather conditions in making decisions for the day. They can infer the importance of the sun to life on Earth. Science Grade 4. Dropped competency. Infer the importance of water in daily activities. Reason. The learning competency is almost a duplication of several lessons in health. The competencies are as follows. Realizes the importance of washing hands and discusses the effect of clean water on one's health. Rephrased competency. Described the importance of the water cycle. Our milk for this one is trace the water cycle and describe its importance. Reason. The LC was expounded to include tracing of the water cycle. Another rephrased competency. Use weather instruments to measure the different weather components. It is revised to use weather instruments and describe the different weather components in a weather chart. Reason for revision. The competency was expounded to relate the instrument measurements to the interpretation of a weather chart. Grade level standards, grade 5. Force and energy, earth and space. Learner can describe the movement of objects in terms of distance and time traveled. Learners recognize that different materials react differently with heat, light, and sound. They can relate these abilities of materials to their specific uses. Learner can describe the changes that earth materials undergo. They can make emergency plans with their families in preparation for typhoons. They can observe patterns in the natural events by observing the appearance of the moon. Science Grade 5. Dropped competency. Use appropriate measuring tools and correct standard units. Reason. There are similar discussions in mathematics where learners measure distance using appropriate tools. Example, measures objects using appropriate measuring tools in meters or centimeters. Measures objects using appropriate measuring units in grams or kilograms. Rephrased competency. Describe the effects of a typhoon on the community. The milk for this is characterize weather disturbances in the Philippines and describe their effects to daily life. Reason. The learning competency is localized to focus on tropical cyclones and its effect. Another dropped competency is relate the cyclical pattern to the length of a month. Reason for dropping the competency. Subsumed in the prior learning competency on patterns on the changes of the appearance of the moon. Grade level standards, grade 6. Force and energy, earth and space. Learner can infer that friction and gravity affect how people and objects move. They have found out that heat, light, sound, electricity, and motion studied earlier are forms of energy and these undergo transformation. Learner can describe what happens during earthquakes and volcanic eruptions and demonstrate what to do when they occur. They can infer that the weather follows a pattern in the course of a year. They have learned about the solar system, with emphasis on the motions of the earth as prerequisite to the study of seasons in another grade level. Science Grade 6. Rephrased competency. Demonstrate rotation and revolution of the earth using a globe to explain day and night and the sequence of seasons. Revise to differentiate between rotation and revolution and describe the effects of the earth's motions. Reason for this revision. The learning competency was expounded to include effects of both rotation and revolution. Dropped competency. Demonstrate the practical and safe uses of simple machines. Reason for dropping the competency. This is partly subsumed in the learning competency manipulate simple machines to describe their characteristics and uses. Grade level standards, grade 3, living things and their environment. At the end of grade 3, the learner can describe the functions of the different parts of the body and things that make up their surroundings, such as rocks and soil, plants and animals. Science Grade 3. Rephrased competency. Describe the parts and functions of the sense organs of the human body. Our milk for this is describe the functions of the sense organs of the human body. Reason. Focus should be on the main function of each sense organ. The parts of the sense organs may be tackled in a much higher grade level, that is, grade 6. Scientific terms of the parts of the sense organs are not appropriate for their age, like cochlea and retina. Dropped competency. Enumerate helpful habits to protect the sense organs. Reason. The learning competency is expected to be covered in grade 2 health. With the competency describes ways of caring for the eyes, ears, nose, hair, and skin in order to avoid common childhood health conditions. Another dropped competency for Science Grade 3 is describe ways of proper handling of animals. Reason. It is in grade 4 EPP. With the competencies na iisa-isa ang wastong pamamaraan sa pag-aalaga ng hayop, pagsasagawa ng maayos na pag-aalaga ng hayop, pagbibigay ng wastong lugar o tirahan, pagpapakain at paglilinis ng tirahan, pagtatala ng pagbabago, pag-unlad, pagbisita sa veterinaryo. Another dropped competency is describe ways of caring and proper handling of plants. Reason. Covered in grade 4 EPP. With the following competencies. Naipakikita ang wastong pamamaraan sa pagpapatubo, pagtatanim ng halamang ornamental, pagpili ng itatanim, paggawa, paghahanda ng taniman, paghahanda ng mga itatanim o patutubuin at itatanim, pagtatanim ayon sa wastong pamamaraan, na isasagawa ang masistemang pangangalaga ng tanim, pagdidilig, pagbubungkal ng lupa, paglalagay ng abono, paggawa ng abonong organiko, at iba pa. Grade level standards, grade 4. Living things and their environment. Learners can describe the functions of the different internal parts of the body in order to practice ways to maintain good health. Learners can classify plants and animals according to where they live and observe interactions among living things and their environment. Learners can infer that plants and animals have traits that help them survive in their environment. Science Grade 4. Dropped competency. Identify the causes and treatment of diseases of the major organs. Reason. Covered in grade 4 health with the following competencies. Identifies common foodborne diseases. Describes communicable diseases. Identifies the various disease agents of communicable diseases. Demonstrates ways to stay healthy and prevent and control common communicable diseases, and identifies ways to break the chain of infection. Merged competencies. Describe some types of beneficial interactions among living things and describe certain types of harmful interactions among living things. The milk for this is describe some types of beneficial and harmful interactions among living things. Reason for merging these two competencies. Fusion of the learning competencies could provide students a better understanding of the organism's interrelationships. Grade level standards, grade 5. Living things and their environment. Learners have developed healthful and hygienic practices related to the reproductive system after describing changes that accompany puberty. Learners can compare different modes of reproduction among plant and animal groups and conduct an investigation on pollination. Learners have become aware of the importance of estuaries and intertidal zones and helped in their preservation. Science Grade 5. We have two dropped competencies. First, describe the changes that occur during puberty. Reason for dropping this learning competency. Covered in Grade 5 Health with two learning competencies. Describe the physical, emotional, and social changes during puberty and accepts changes as a normal part of growth and development. The second dropped competency is give ways of taking care of the reproductive organs. Reason. It is also covered in Grade 5 Health with the competency practices proper self-care procedures. Grade level standards, Grade 6. Living things and their environment. Learners understand how the different organ systems of the human body work together. Learners can classify plants based on reproductive structures and animals based on the presence or lack of backbone. Learners can design and conduct an investigation on plant propagation. Learners can describe larger ecosystems such as rainforests, coral reefs, and mangrove swamps. Science Grade 6. Dropped competency. Distinguish how spore-bearing and cone-bearing plants reproduce. Reason for dropping the competency. Covered in Grade 5 competency. Describe the different modes of reproduction in flowering and non-flowering plants such as moss, fern, mongo, and others. Grade level standards, Grade 3. Matter. They can classify these things as solid, liquid, or gas. Learners can describe the changes in the conditions of their surroundings. This would lead learners to become more curious about their surroundings, appreciate nature, and practice health and safety measures. Science Grade 3. Dropped competency. Described different objects based on their characteristics like shape, weight, volume, ease of flow. Retained competency. Classify objects and materials as solid, liquid, and gas based on some observable characteristics. Reason. The first learning competency had already been introduced partly in earlier grades. Furthermore, it is also subsumed in the retained learning competency, which lead the students to classify solids, liquids, and gases. Another dropped competency. Describe ways on the proper use and handling solid, liquid, and gas found at home and in school. Reason. This learning competency leads students to classify objects based on observable characteristics similar to the retained learning competency. This can form part of an activity to reinforce the learning competency. Grade level standards, grade 4, matter. At the end of grade 4, learners can investigate changes in some observable properties of materials when mixed with other materials or when force is applied on them. They can identify materials that do not decay and use this knowledge to help minimize waste at home, school, and in the community. Science grade 4. We have two dropped competencies. First, identify the effects of decaying materials on one's health and safety. Second, demonstrate proper disposal of waste according to the properties of its materials. Reason. These learning competency can form part of an activity to reinforce the learning competency, classify objects and materials as solid, liquid, and gas based on some observable characteristics. Another reason for dropping these two competencies. It's subsumed in grade 6 health with the following competencies. Classifies different types of waste. Describe proper ways of waste disposal, and practices proper waste management at home, in school, and in the community. Grade level standards, grade 5, matter. At the end of grade 5, learners can decide whether materials are safe and useful by investigating about some of their properties. They can infer that new materials may form when there are changes in properties due to certain conditions. Science grade 5. Dropped competency. Recognize the importance of recycle, reduce, reuse, recover, and repair in waste management. Reason. Subsumed in the learning competency, designed a product out of local, recyclable solid and or liquid materials in making useful products. Discussed in the following competencies. Describes proper ways of waste disposal and practices proper waste management at home, in school, and in the community. Grade level standards, grade 6, matter. At the end of grade 6, learners recognize that when mixed together, materials may not form new ones. Thus, these materials may be recovered using different separation techniques. They can prepare useful mixtures such as food, drinks, and herbal medicines. Science grade 6. Retained competency. Describe the appearance and uses of uniform and non-uniform mixtures. It is rephrased to describe the appearance and uses of homogeneous and heterogeneous mixture. Another retained competency. Enumerate techniques in separating mixtures such as decantation, evaporation, filtering, sieving, and using magnet. It is rephrased to describe techniques in separating mixtures such as decantation, evaporation, filtering, sieving, and using magnet. Reason for revision. Revised to require the learner to describe the various separation techniques, which requires a higher level cognitive demand than just recognizing them. We have a dropped competency. Tell the benefits of separating mixtures from products in community. Why is it dropped? This can be learned along with the second learning competency as learners are directed to describe various separation techniques. Let us all remember that releasing the most essential learning competencies is not a departure from the K 12 basic education science curriculum. The key stage and grade level standards are retained. It has the same vision of developing scientific, technological, and environmental literacy. The learning competencies were trimmed down to the most essential fundamental competencies our learners must acquire. How to use the most essential learning competencies or MELCs. Some MELCs are in broad statements, and we need to unpack them. There must be an alignment between the MELCs and the content standards and performance standards. In this time of pandemic, time allocation is flexible. Let us have an example. Grade 8 first quarter. Content standard. The learners demonstrate understanding of work using constant force, power, gravitational potential energy, kinetic energy, and elastic potential energy. Performance standard. The learners should be able to develop a written plan and implement a Newton's Olympics. Now, the milk for the following standards we have: identify and explain the factors that affect the potential and kinetic energy. The milk mentioned can be unpacked to a more specific learning objectives. Again, the milk presented is identify and explain the factors that affect potential and kinetic energy. Here is an example of unpacked milk to learning objectives. Letter A. Defined and differentiate potential and kinetic energy. Letter B. Identify the factors that affect potential energy. C. Determine the mathematical variation between potential energy and mass and height from the ground. D. Compare the values of potential energy of varying masses at the same elevation from the ground. E. Identify the factors that affect kinetic energy. F. Determine the mathematical variation between kinetic energy and mass and velocity. G. Create and explain a concept map involving the terms kinetic energy, potential energy, mass, velocity, and elevation. And letter H. Demonstrate and explain the law of conservation of energy using a pendulum. The first 7 learning objectives respond to the content standard, demonstrate understanding of work using constant force, power, gravitational potential energy, kinetic energy, and elastic energy. The last learning objective helps the students prepare for the performance standard, that is to plan for Newton's Olympics. Now, by unpacking the milk, we were able to hit and accomplish the required standards. To have a copy of the latest milks, visit this link bit.do/MELC, all in capital letters, then S small letter 2020. Again, bit.do/melks 2020 for you to access the MELC's guidelines and learning area briefers. Let me end my presentation with this statement by Hans A. Beef. We need science education to produce scientists, but we need it equally to create literacy in the public. Thank you.
Thank you,
Yes.
Ma'am Rowena, for our melts in science.
Actually, para makakasama natin si Ma'am Rowena ngayon.
Yes. Hello, Ma'am
Hi. Good
Rowena.
afternoon, Ma'am Joanna and Sir
Afternoon.
Jer.
Thank you for
And
sharing your mails, Ma'am. In
yes,
science.
Yes.
ma'am. And
Galing, galing.
congratulations also, Ma'am Rowena.
Thank you. Thank you
Any
so much.
any additional insights po?
Okay. Before the additional insights, ma'am, I would like to take this opportunity to thank our education program supervisor, Ma'am Genevieve Faye Pasamonte, for her guidance and assistance for the success of the presentation, and of course, to my colleagues. I hope that you were able to understand the melts, no? Yung how did we come up with the melts from the learning
Yes.
competencies down to the most essential learning competencies. Okay. And I would like to reiterate that the melts is actually um, pre- uh, is anchored on the prescribed standards and not a departure from the
Yes.
standards-based basic education curriculum. So ganun pa rin. Parang na-trim down lang yung MELCs.
Opo.
Okay po.
I agree with that,
There's
Ma'am
no issue
Rowena.
with that.
Yes, Ma'am Jo and Sir Jerms.
So thank you po, Ma'am Rowena.
Thank you. Thank you
Thank you
so
so much
much po.
for sharing your expertise.
So at this juncture, we will be listening for a closing message to be given to us by our dearest school head of the Shannon National High School, none other than the dynamic and gorgeous Ma'am Emmy Bokong.
Hello, Ma'am.
Hi, Ma'am
Good afternoon.
Emmy.
Hello, Sir Germ, Sir Ma'am Joanna. Thank you very much.
Yes, ma'am.
Go ahead,
Okay,
Ma'am.
good afternoon. Before anything else, I would like to commend our MELCS presenters in different subject areas and also the principals who are very supportive of their teachers from New Valencia Integrated School, Sir Tutor, from New Carmen Integrated School, Sir Ariate, Bartolome Integrated School, Sir Baladares, and of course, Ma'am Rojas of Balderas Integrated School.
Yes, ma'am. Thank
Thank you very
you.
much for your support. So, our day two is done, and we would like to thank God, of course, that we have a good signal and we have a good weather.
Yes,
Although
thank
the
you, Lord.
weather now or this afternoon is gloomy.
Yes, ma'am.
And I know the teachers are, of course, apprehensive of this new world, according to our DepEd Secretary, that this is a whole new brave world. And we are all adjusting to this new venue wherein we are going to present our platforms in a virtual way, but we cannot do anything about it but to embrace the
Yes.
new changes. And
Yes,
of
ma'am.
course, I know our teachers are also adjusting to different webinars, left and right, the virtual presentations, and of course, the internet signals, the struggles of that signal na siya talaga ang
Yes, the
binibigyan
struggle
sa
is
lahat.
real.
No? But of course, we cannot do anything but to embrace this and adjust ourselves with this so that we can continue to deliver our mission, vision, and goals. Remember that on top of this is our students. Education must continue in spite of this pandemic. Sulong edukalidad.
Yes,
Two
ma'am.
thumbs up for all our MELCS presenters and to the school heads. Thank you and good afternoon.
Thank you so
Thank
much,
you,
Ma'am Emmy.
ma'am.
So we have flashed already our evaluation link. Can you follow it? Type nyo lang sa inyong mga laptop, sa inyong browser, ang link ng ating evaluation for today, for day 2 of our webinar sessions. So that's it. I hope that we were able to get you across about the essential learning competencies in different subjects and made the pieces of your learning today become a good help in teaching your pupils synchronously and asynchronously.
Yes, we can do this. We have to go forth this fight in these trying times just to give the quality education for our learners. As teachers, we can also call ourselves as frontliners since we still need to continue giving our learners the right for education, whether it could be online, modular, or blended learning.
That's correct, Ma'am Joanna. Even though change can be difficult, many times it's also for the best. But whatever
Yes.
kind of change we are dealing with, know that we will learn to cope and that we have a unique opportunity to shape our learners' future. Just like the cohesion of the melts, because we are able to cope in this pandemic, then this has become our opportunity to even continuously deliver education to our pupils during this pandemic.
Yes, I agree with that, Sir Jermaine. And I think that's all for today. Thank you so much for sticking with us from the start of this session till the end. And also to our webinar director and our production team, thank you for being so patient with us.
Thank you so much.
So before we end, I would like to leave this quotation. Nothing wonderful is ever gained by taking it easy. It requires commitment and dedication. So, dear teachers, let us not give up on doing what is good, for at the proper time we will reap our rewards. Maraming salamat po and good afternoon.
At pahabol na lang po, advertise na lang natin in advance kasi
Sige, sir.
tomorrow sa morning, pati na siguro sa hapon ay magkakaroon din tayo ng showcasing ng different simulations ng ang ating mga guro sa elementarya na gagamitin na talaga yung learning management system portal.
Yes. So, we will have four simulators, demonstrators tomorrow representing the respective schools. Right, that's right, Sir Jermaine?
Yes, ma'am, that's correct.
Okay.
For integrated schools in elementary.
Yes. So thank
So
you so
abangan natin.
much. Okay. So I hope na marami tayong viewers tomorrow. So please go teacher, share the link and share the link for tomorrow's activity. Thank you so
Don't
much and
forget
God bless.
to follow the evaluation link for today, ha? Sayang.
Yes. Thank you so much. And once again, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Goodbye.